What's going on, everyone? Mike Kadlick and Tayler Kyles here for CLNS Media, back with another edition of the Patriots Daily Podcast. And today we're going to steer a little bit away from the Patriots. We're going to try and kind of loop it all in, but we're pleased to welcome on Bobby Manning, CLNS Celtics beat reporter, fresh off an NBA championship. Celtics obviously set to raise banner 18 after winning the whole thing on Monday night. So, Bobby, thank you for joining us. And before we try and tie this whole thing into the Patriots and how to kind of build a champion, we'd love to take you. We would love to have you take us through what that night was like. You've been on the Celtics beat for a couple of years now. They've been building towards it. Garden Report, you guys have been building towards it, and it finally accumulates into a championship. So, how did it feel? Because I kind of feel like you guys kind of feel like a champion as well. So, what did the whole thing? What did the whole thing feel like?
Yeah, as far as the game goes, there wasn't a lot of drama, which was good and bad. You like to have a interesting game to talk about.
Yeah.
But in that situation where you're trying to get ready to cover the ceremony and just cover the night, it was pretty good to have that 20-point cushion, be able to get downstairs and get all the video and everything that you needed. And the whole post game was just crazy.
Yeah.
You didn't really know what to do. You didn't know where to go, who to talk to, because you just hadn't covered anything like that before. So I got in a pretty good position down by the tunnel, and you got really good video of them coming off. Tatum was carrying the trophy through. I tried to grab Tito Horford, who was hanging out down there, but he was stuck on the phone. And then I went right to the locker room, and there was a row of TV cameras and reporters like miles long around the corner trying to get in there. So I just kind of squeezed in once the door opened with everybody who was making their way in there, and pretty much spent an hour in there, which I didn't expect the kind of access we got in there. I was basically just able to videotape everything in there for like 50, 60 minutes and just grab people, pull them aside, ask them a couple questions. So I ended up talking to like 6, 7 people in there and just took in the whole celebration. It was pretty wild. It was really fun. I didn't get too wet, which was good.
Yeah, did they give you guys like ponchos or something like that to kind of get in there?
Some people took their own.
Okay.
John said I should have brought one, and I was like, I didn't really want to run the store or search for one. So
get an umbrella next year.
I mean, you need something if you're really going to try to get in the mix in there. I kind of try to stay off to the side and just pull people when they came near me. But if you were really trying to get into the middle of the celebration, you were going to get soaked. I know Abby did. A couple other people came out of there just drenched. So that was certainly a possibility and something to look out for if you're going to cover a Super Bowl.
Is there any like blueprint or game plan for that? Like you said, it was like mayhem. Like, did they tell you before, like, okay, this is how it's going to go? Or was it just like game ends all of a sudden? Like it's different, right? Like it's different than a normal post-game locker room situation. Cause again, you were in there for almost an hour, champagne's going everywhere. Guys are, drinking and like all this stuff. So like, what was there any sort of like, okay, this is what's going to happen, or was it just like a free for all basically?
It was a free for all. You had no idea. And obviously in a normal locker room, you're probably only talking to one guy in a scrum. But on this night, everybody's relevant. And that was something I said a bunch that night with this team is that there really wasn't a guy, maybe like 2, 3, 4 players on the team didn't do anything all year. So pretty much everybody played some kind of role in the championship, even if it was just during the regular season. There were a lot of guys who played. There were a lot of guys who filled in. There were specialists on the team. You had coaches who played an important role. He didn't really get to talk to a lot during the year. Even like the main minor league G League team had a lot of guys who probably project to play some sort of role in the future here. So everybody had something to say in there. And it was cool kind of talking to some of the guys while on the bench. I know my Jordan Walsh interview is getting a lot of run right now on Twitter. Him just being out of his mind in there. He didn't play a lot during the year. Maybe like a couple of games at the very end, but he developed in Maine all year. He probably will play a little bit next year or the year after that. And looks like a guy who could fill in as they start to lose some players into the future, which will be important as they try to keep this run going here. So, there was no blueprint. You try to avoid the press conferences this time of year because there's just so many people and everyone's so buttoned up there. Now, I didn't get through all of them yet because I wasn't there for them. I was in the locker room the whole time, but I feel like there were probably some better answers, but throughout the finals, especially Joe, like everybody was just so locked in. Everyone was so buttoned up. There were so many questions, so much competition for the mic in there that didn't end up being the place to go. And I'm fortunate I had locker room access because it was pretty tight. I ended up getting it at the last second. But man, that was something to see on Monday night. Yeah, Monday night.
Starting to blend together. One more thing, we will start to infuse some Patriots in here for everybody watching, but I am curious. It felt like that loss in Dallas had to happen to get Boston back home so they could celebrate on their home court with their fans. Another moment, other than obviously the win, was that Pritchard shot from half court to finish the first half. What was that like to actually be there? Because I was literally watching on a loop for all of halftime because seeing the entire crowd jump up, like you could see everyone's like, oh, is it going to go in? Because he'd already done it earlier in the series. So what was that like actually being present? Because it was insane just to watch it on video.
The place went crazy, and I was listening to Bill Simmons yesterday, and his dad said it was crazier in there for that than the Bird Steal, which is something to think about.
Wow!
And he did it in game 2, which was the craziest part. So we write the whole story about how Jalen said he checked himself in, Peyton did, and he basically went into the game in game 2 to shoot that shot. I think at the end of the third, it wasn't going into halftime in that game, but pretty similar situation. And you see him run to the bench again. There's 3-4 seconds left. There's a guy at the free throw line, and he comes in the game and just grabs the ball and goes, and no one really picks him up. And so me and Jimmy are sitting there next to each other, and I'm like, here he comes. He's going to do it again. And he grabs the ball. He goes. No one picks him up. He tosses it up, and it just goes right in, and Jimmy starts like shaking me, and it was a crazy moment even upstairs where we were. Yeah, it was wild in there that night, and it was almost similar. It obviously was a level above because they're about to clinch a championship, but that game 7 last year against the Heat, when they're about to pull off the 3-0 comeback, the first ever, and everybody's there, celebrities, former players and stuff. It was this real moment in there, and then you had the letdown, and it was like, ooh, and it just the nerves, the level of energy just went down slowly throughout the game. And this one, as the lead built up, the energy just started to build in there. And it almost felt like 08 game 6, how big they were up in the second half, how little doubt there was about the championship at that point. So it almost just became a quarter-long celebration by the time the fourth came around.
That's awesome. And it's like, I keep seeing like Peyton Pritchard's like the first NBA special teams player where like he literally was on the floor for like 4 seconds. He does the one thing. And now granted, Peyton's, better than just half court shots, but having out of a rough series and then he's in there and he hits 2 like half court shots at the end of the buzzer is pretty awesome. So
he's also in a full wide receiver stance before it. Like he's down and everything. I'm like, oh crap. He's taking a little page out of Julian Edelman's playbook.
Yeah. That was a couple football moments and I don't know if you saw the play the Pacers ran at the end of, I think it was game 4, where guys are just running routes full court. Yeah. So there were a couple of those during this run.
Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. The finals mean more on Prize Picks, and so do the star players. You get boosted payouts on select basketball stars that you won't find anywhere else. When the finals are over, the hoops action doesn't stop on Prize Picks. Women's basketball is just getting started, and with young stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves, alongside greats like Brianna Stewart and Asia Wilson, you can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. This week on Prize Picks, I'm looking at the basketball board, and I'm taking Jaylen Brown's overs on points and rebounds because dude has been absolutely killing it. I'm also going to take Caitlin Clark for more than 3.5 3-pointers made and Brianna Stewart for more than 25 points. Download the app today and use the code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code CLNS for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
I guess this one's not fully football focused, but like, what do you think the keys were from, start to finish for the Celtics to really like assemble a championship roster? Like, is it all skill? Is it off the court? Like, leadership, mentality, things like that. Like, well, I guess what are the key pieces that, went into assembling this team that was able to raise banner 18?
Especially with all the with the Jays and everybody talking about those guys up. It felt like there was so much controversy for the past couple of years about how they were assembling the team. Just to kind of add on there, it just was fascinating to finally see it come together.
Yeah, there were a lot of roster building debates the whole time, even going back 10 years ago to the trade that started everything, sending out Pearson Garnett and getting all those picks that they got. So they made the tough decision at that time. It wasn't a grueling decision because they lost in the first round the year before. It was pretty clear their run was coming to an end given the ages of those guys. But they still made a difficult decision to trade them, and they got a lot. That ultimately led to Brown and Tatum getting drafted, and making those draft picks was a tough choice too. You had other guys in there who would have been major busts. So those were two of the best draft picks, frankly, ever at those positions because they weren't easy decisions. You had Ball and Brandon Ingram and Jamal Murray and some other guys floating around at that Jalen spot. That one was a little easier just because you were third and the guy who you picked just kind of fell to you in that spot. But then the Tatum one, everyone's thinking Markelle Fultz back then, including me. So those weren't easy picks to make. You trade.
Well, I heard you guys talking about that on the Garden Report the other night, where it's like they had to trade back, they had to hit that, and then they're also like Jimmy seemed upset about it, but like Josh Jackson was sitting right there, and that could have easily been the pick for them as well. Now, granted, he said like he didn't want to play for Boston or whatever, but you not only have to hit the trade, but you also have to hit on the players you pick. So it's like 1 out of a million kind of just all going back on top of each other.
Yeah, so you start to make the comparisons a little bit, and the tough part is when you look at the past, they didn't trade Brady. They didn't get anything for him. He just walks. So that's the tough part, one there. You're not really accumulating phenomenal picks the whole way through. You make the mistake.
Phenomenal, Bobby. Good work.
Yeah, and Mac had maybe a chance if things went a certain way, but in the end, it doesn't work. So you're almost resetting now with May, trying to get the first centerpiece into the future there. And with a new coach and everything else, maybe that's another comparison because Brad obviously didn't really work at the beginning there, and they make that change and get Ime and Joe, and those end up being the right guys. Not Ime, but Joe rather. So you're hoping Mayo ends up setting the stage here. But the good thing to look at, I guess, with the Pats is that they're sort of at a ground stage rebuild here. Like they get that top pick. They pick a guy who seems to have the cachet, the pedigree to be a centerpiece quarterback into the future. And at least from afar, looking at how this year is going to go, they're probably going to have another top end pick this year if it looks like the way it's being projected. So if you hit those first two big time, that sets the stage for everything from that point on. And, things can kind of go up and down. I guess the other thing you have to point to too here is the money. Wick and that ownership group for Boston spent at a high level when they needed to. They've committed to a massive luxury tax hit into the future to put this roster together. And so that more than anything, you obviously had the core talent from the very beginning, and those guys developed over the years. But those guys hit bumps in the road, and they needed guys who complemented them at the highest level, and they went and got those guys. And that took a little bit of luck. That took a little bit of aggressiveness, and it certainly took ownership commitment to spending big money there. So those are the other ingredients you need, certainly.
Totally. And then I guess that too, like what, because they've failed, right? Failed is maybe strong because they end up winning the championship. But like last year, you mentioned it, like they go up 3-0. Or they go down 3-0, they come back from 3-0, and then they collapse, right? And like Jalen talked about how like that was, that hurt. And then they kind of climb back and they do it again. And a lot of teams would falter and fail. So like what lessons can the Patriots learn from this? Like how do they, and again, it's different, it's crossing sports, so it's not all linear, but what did you see from the Celtics that like the Patriots can take from this team to sort of build and continue to grow and end up trying to be a championship team in the future?
I guess that it's not a straight line, and you definitely, I think 2021 was the year where you started to have some doubts about this core working together. The two guys at the center of it. We have. Were you
ever a split up the Jays guy?
So when it was Ime's first year, January, they collapsed up 28 at New York or wherever it was, and it was almost halfway through the year. They're stuck at 500, and at that point, I was open to anything. I wasn't calling for them to be split up at that point, but whatever they wanted to do at that time, I was there for, because it was just maddening that year and a half where they win one, lose one. Usually the loss was a massive collapse. And instead, they went out and actually reinforced that roster by adding Derek White. And that was something else I wanted to see, was them be a little more aggressive with upgrading the talent. And I think that's the other thing you got to look at too, especially as the Pats try to climb their way up here, is there is value in adding where you can, taking advantage of an opportunity. You might not feel like you're a championship team yet, but does that one move, two moves push you closer to making the playoffs? Then finally you have that playoff experience, and you're not in the mix for a Super Bowl yet at that point, but you get a feel for the playoffs. You get to go through that. Obviously the Pats did that 1 year in 2021 with Mac, but it didn't really build off that. I feel like, especially off the last run there, I know they added a bunch of guys going into that year, but you have to be pretty aggressive with supplementing the roster around your young key guys. And that's still the concern here. I know they try to go get Ridley. I know they made a bunch of draft picks to try to reinforce that offensive line, but you got to have guys who allow him to succeed early. And that's the other thing you look at here too with Brissett. Like, how long does he last? You know, is he a guy who can play out a full season and let May develop behind the scenes? Or is he a guy who has them at 1-3, 0-4 early, and all of a sudden everybody's calling for May in October? Right. That's the one thing I'm looking at with the Pats here, is you need to have the pieces around the young guys to help them succeed. And, you know, to the Celtics point, again, they didn't have that in 2021. It was a disaster. It was Tristan Thompson and Evan Fournier, and Tatum and Brown had to do everything. Right. And that year just ended up being a first-round exit in 5 games. So that taught you the lesson going forward. And they actually had to change GMs off that as well, with Brad moving upstairs. And you got a little bit more of an aggressive GM. So, again, it's not a straight line. There were moments during this run, or the build-up to this run, where you thought it wasn't going to happen. So I guess that's, from a fan perspective, something you can look at and say, there might be a season in here during this Patriots rebuild where it really looks bad. But that isn't necessarily telling of where it might be 2 years after that.
And you mentioned how, like, the Patriots tried to get Ridley and they tried to supplement the roster. But one big piece of that for New England was the fact that they were so bad last season and haven't really been good in a while. It's kind of hard, even if you are throwing money at people, to kind of get free agents in the building, because they're like, hey, I want a chance at a championship and you guys look like you're far off. So how important do you think it was to have the Jays still in-house, where it's like, yeah, we have 2 very talented guys. We really just need a couple veterans who can supplement them and really bring everything together? Like, do you think those glimpses of success early were important, or do you think it was more, you know, the aggressiveness and, like you said, ownership being willing to spend, and some of those factors that contributed to them finally being able to get the pieces to make this thing happen?
It's a little bit of both, because those guys weren't ready from a playmaking standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, to lead the team at that point. So you need to go out and get a White who can help glue things a little bit together. You had to go out and get a Porzingis as that release valve when the play is not really there and it's breaking down. You just got to toss to somebody to score. But during this run, obviously Porzingis wasn't available for a lot of it. Holiday had his moments where he was effective, White too. But this is Brown and Tatum reaching that higher level as scorers, as playmakers, as defenders too. And they're really these all-around guys. The luxury you have in those guys is that they can do everything. There's no real major weakness in either of their games. Neither of them's a non-defender. Neither of them's a guy who's not willing to make a pass or stuff like that. So they're just touching all these different areas of the game. But that wasn't the case 2 years ago when they started to supplement the roster around them. They had real weaknesses that they needed to work on. And having guys who could minimize those or just fill in those areas to help them out was so key. And that's the thing. You had to be aggressive with draft picks. You had to be aggressive with trades. They weren't signing any of these guys. These were all trades that they made. Right. So you didn't have the money to go and do that. And obviously Boston, not the biggest free agent destination in the NBA. So you drafted your 2 core guys. You kept them together, as you said there, Taylor. And then you trade for all the other guys you needed at that spot. And now you look at it, they win the championship, and it probably becomes a little bit more of a destination like the Patriots did during their run. You got the centerpiece guys who are probably going to be much more respected, right? Yep. They have that ring now at this point. They've done what it takes. So they're going to have that ability to draw guys to Boston at that point. And that's the key thing in getting that first one, is that actually looks like a destination at this point. And those 2 guys, keeping them together was the real key. And I don't think Brad, at least from everything I've ever heard, even considered that. Yep. I think the floor you had with those guys was just too high. Just from having those talented pieces, despite their flaws, you were going to be in the mix year after year after year. It was just, could you build the roster around them? And they finally did. And the other aspect to that too, off the court, the leadership, it was probably important that you move smart out of this. As divisive as a move like that was. I don't really think there's a Patriots parallel there now because all those guys from the past run are kind of out the door at this point. So it is going to be on the younger guys at this point to lead early and often. So when that time comes, it's probably going to be now. They got to be ready for that. And, fortunately, they're going to have a couple of rebuilding years here to lead up to when they really have to lead them through the playoffs and stuff like that. But that was important for Tatum and Brown, too, was to be thrust into that leadership position because Smart was gone.
The NBA Finals are finally here, and if I have any chance at all to find tickets to a game, it's probably going to be through Game Time, an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Getting through the Game Time app is super easy, and I really like their user interface. All you have to do is go to the game or event that you want to attend, go through the venue to see where you want to sit relative to the action. Then you can actually get a panoramic view of your seat so you'll know exactly what to expect once you get your ticket. Game Time's also great for those weekends where you're not really sure what you want to do with your night because you can just scroll through, look at flash deals, zone deals, or last-minute tickets and find a plan to spend the rest of your day or evening. You can save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticket industry. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Non-Patriots related question before we wrap up with one quick one at the end. But you mentioned that, well, put it this way: Tatum at the end of the game, he's on the court with Lisa Salters, and he says, what are they going to say next, right? And people can argue that this path was rather, people say the path for them was rather easy, right? Like the guys were hurt, they went 4-1, 4-1, 4-0, 4-1, right? Like they just smoked it. Denver wasn't a problem. Denver wasn't in their way. Milwaukee wasn't in their way. So, at this point, people are freaking complaining about Jason Tatum's post-game comments, saying he's trying to rip off KG.
It was a little KG-esque.
It was.
I was watching. I was like, "Oh, he's gonna do the thing, isn't he?"
Maybe it was a little cringy, but also I don't care because he just won a freaking championship. But it's hard to kind of nitpick things. But what can be nitpicked? Like, what can they do this again? Right now, okay, they win one. They have to do it again. Do you think they would have been here if they had to go through more of a challenge and guys were more healthy and they hit Milwaukee and they hit Denver? Like, was this too easy for them? And do they have what it takes to do it again?
I actually think they got tested earlier more than people think. And you can't deny the fact that the stars on those opposing sides went down in pretty much every series. But Mitchell played a little bit in the second round. Halliburton played a little bit in the third round. Pacers and Cavs, I thought, threw a lot at them. Cavs defensively, Pacers offensively, and you could have legitimately been down 3-1 in that series through 4 games if you didn't make the comebacks that you did in those games. So you got tested there. And then Dallas was healthy. That wasn't the best team you could have seen out of the West from a matchup standpoint because I thought the Mavs just matched up horribly with the Celtics. And that's credit to the Celtics and the way they're able to attack weak guards and the way they're able to defend 1 through 5 versatilely. So that just is all speaking to the way the Celtics took care of business, the way they were able to win some close games. They never lost a crunch time game during the playoffs. I think they went 6-0. So all that stuff is a credit to them and their dominance. It shouldn't have been a surprise in the end that they rolled through the playoffs. Right. I know some people had skepticism because of how they played in the past, but this year they had one of the highest net ratings ever. And so they dominated the field. And again, it's a matchup game. You look back at every championship run in the NBA, and there were breaks along the way. And maybe the Celtics got a few more than the average team did. But you need to have the right matchups. You need to have the right luck. There's some injuries mixed in all the time. The Celtics stayed pretty healthy, but they also lost Porzingis. Right. They had to play pretty much 3 rounds without him. So that didn't work in their favor either. So I think it all balances out in the end. No one's going to remember who they played or who was available first round. They're just going to remember the run. The dominance in the finals kind of spoke for itself, and the expectation will be there to win again next year, certainly with the roster they're bringing back and all of that. And we'll see how Porzingis recovers from this injury and just being so injured throughout this whole run. But I don't look too much at the easy path and all that stuff. I feel like that talk's already starting to die down a little bit.
Yeah.
And as time goes on, it'll just continue to die down even more and even more. I mean, look at who the Pats played during some of their runs in the second round. It was like the Colts and whoever. So sometimes you get those
Beating
breaks.
up on
You get
the
a bye.
Chargers by 40. Yeah.
Yeah, you get a bye in football too.
Yep. So to give Patriots fans some hope wrapping this up, do you see any similarities from the early years of Tatum and Brown to kind of where the Patriots are right now? And also, what would you tell Patriots fans who kind of like Celtics fans were used to dynasties and great teams and then went through a lull where they weren't really bringing those home and finally were able to make it out on top?
Yeah, not with Brown and Tatum, because you had a stacked team that they were drafted into right away with Kyrie and Hayward and all that stuff. So it's tough to compare those two, but I will compare it to the very beginning of this run. Again, Brad's in his first year coaching, coming out of college. Mayo's in that position now. Mm-hmm. You had that horrendous year, effectively a tank year off the bat, where you're just not in the mix ever. And I think the Celtics had like 30 wins or something that year, maybe. So that is where you're at if you're the Pats now. Are you 10 years away from a title at this point? I don't know. It's tough to say, given how these next years go. Will dictate a lot of how fast it's going to come together again. But at least from my perspective, I was a fan then. I was going to games. I was buying $13 tickets. You enjoy that. You enjoy watching some of the younger guys develop. You enjoy watching all the moving and shaking they're going to have to do roster-wise. So there is some fun in any sport, really, to being at the bottom, because there's only one way to go, which is up. So that year, it was tough because you never really knew whether you wanted them to win or not. I feel like the Pats are still going to be in a similar position this year where you're like, all right, like it'll be good if they win some of these games. But at the end of the year, if you have 2-3 wins and you're picking at the top again, is that for the better long term? And again, to compare it to the Celtics, year 2, you're tanking again for the first half of that year. But then you go out and get Isaiah at that trade deadline and everything changes and they start winning like crazy and they make the playoffs. And you're like, was this good? Was this bad? But it ends up being good because then the next year they're in the playoffs again. And the year after that, they're in the East Finals. So there's levels to the build. You know, there's different ways to do it. They certainly had their ups and downs. The Celtics did. And I'm sure the Pats are going to have it here too. So there's going to have to be a patience. There's going to have to be a different level of expectation, certainly with this group compared to what people are used to through the Brady years and all that. But you also try to enjoy it. I'm sure the tickets will be a little cheaper to go to Gillette. I'm sure, there's going to be a lot of moves and stuff. Yeah, game time. So that's all good. And you're just going to have to find your own way to enjoy it because it's not going to be the same as it was before. And that's, I think, similar to the way the Celtics were too, coming out of that KG Pierce era where you're right in the mix pretty much every year with those real stalwart veterans.
I think that's a good way to first of all, a good way to sort of wrap it up and kind of take it to the end here, but also like, we're so lucky being from here where like it's always like it's contender or bust. And the Patriots were like that for so long, and that's the expectation. So there's sort of 4 or 5 years now post Brady, and it's like, when is this going to happen? But when you look at the Celtics and how they did it from 2008 on, it was this slow, methodical, ups and downs, roller coaster rebuild. And that's how most things work. That's how it's supposed to work in sports, right? And that's why the draft is set up the way it is in sports, where you hit the bottom and you kind of rebuild and you're able to regain it. And the Celtics did just that. And now it wasn't just building through the draft, like you mentioned, Bobby. It was trades and, a lot of luck involved. But there's a way the Patriots can do this, I think. It just, again, they have to hit on a lot of stuff. There has to be luck involved. But they can get it done. You just got to have some patience, just like Celtics fans did for quite some time. So that's going to do it for our episode of Pat's Daily here, using our good friend Bobby Manning from CLNS Media, Celtics beat reporter. You can check out all his work, Bobby. Actually, you know what? I'll let you plug it. It's Summer League's coming up. What do you have coming down the pipe? What's going on over at CLNS for you guys as the Celtics continue this? They sort of peter off this run from a championship.
Yeah, speaking of the draft, it's in 7 days, which is hard to imagine. The Celtics are going to pick 30th. You're going to see Jordan Walsh back at Summer League in about a month from now, which will be cool. And, of course, whoever they pick in the first or second round, they could probably trade back just like last year, which is something I've heard a lot of buzz about. So this is going to be a quieter offseason than the last, which goes without saying. But certainly the Tatum extension will get done here soon. The White extension is something that they're going to talk out. So there's a few stories to follow. But after this run, we covered 101 games this year. I'm ready for
Crazy.
a quieter summer. And Olympics too, which
Good.
is fun.
Oh, yeah.
Tatum, Holiday,
Yeah.
possibly White will be playing for Team USA, and then some other guys for other countries.
Love
My
it.
favorite
Well,
player, Derek White.
Yeah.
I hope he makes it. That'll be really fun if he's in the Olympics. See
That
how his
would be
tooth is
cool.
doing.
Yeah, right. Maybe, yeah. Get the tooth fixed first, and then go over to Paris. But Bob, thank you so much for joining me. We appreciate joining us, myself and Taylor. We appreciate the time. Everyone else out there, thanks for listening. Make sure you rate, review, subscribe to the pod. Check out Patriots Press Pass on YouTube, and you can check out all of our work at Kyles39 for him and at Mike Kadlick for me over on Twitter. Again, this is Bobby Manning from CLNS, taking us through the Celtics championship run and how we can relate it to the Patriots and where they're at now. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves, Taylor. Take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.